to start the meeting tonight. Call to order. First agenda item is the budget workshop.
Yeah, so we got several things that we want to go through with you during this time. I think for those of you, well, everybody was at the ISB workshop last Thursday night. I think you'll see several things that were discussed there, and maybe even some from the convention in November. So we'll kind of hit on quite a few things. We try to, when Gary and I talk, we're trying to make sure it isn't overwhelming, but we do have several different things we're going to show you here. And like for Annika and Karen a little bit too, just remember every time we do this, you learn a little bit more. So, but first we're going to have Gary. Gary's going to go over a few things with you, and then I've got some things I'm going to go over with you. So I'm going to let Gary get his started.
Okay, in your packet, there'll be a sheet, it's got a chart, and if you guys are that interested, it's right behind you on that table. There's all the handouts that go with the meeting. But it's the chart that says 20-year district assessed valuation history. And I thought this is something that you might have a little interest in. We are very lucky to live in a school district where the assessed valuations are strong and they do continue to increase. In this chart here, or this table, you can see that over the past 20 years, we've only had 2 years where it declined. One in 2002, 2003, where it went down about 1%. And then in 2004, 2005, it went down right at 10%. But as you can see, for most of the years, it's pretty strong. And in 12, 13, it went up 8.5%. And 14, 15, it went up almost 15%. For this year that we're looking at, now I will preface this by saying that bottom one on there says 2020, 2021. I think in actuality, that's the valuations we're going to be using for this coming year's budget, but these valuations are actually a couple years behind. I think it's 2019 is the actual valuation, but you can see that it went up from the previous year 2.82%, which is about $29 million, and so again, another fairly healthy increase. Then if you flip the page, this is a 20-year history of our levies. Again, I thought it might be something you were interested in. If you'll notice, the one on the left-hand side is the general fund levy, and that we've been fairly consistent between about 8 and I think the highest one on here is 10.75. Just a little bit of a note, in 2015-16 is when the instructional support levy went on the tax rolls. That particular year, that increased our levy by 0.48702 on the general fund. And but you'll notice that the two lowest years over the past 20 was 18-19 was the lowest year on there, and then last year would be the second lowest for general fund levies. Then the next column is the management fund levy. You can see that that's bounced around some. I show the average there at about 58 cents, but the high was in 2006-07 at about 89 cents. And then the low was that same year that we implemented the instructional support levy. It was only 11 cents. We had a balance there. And you can see after that year, we only levied about 30 cents for the next couple of years. We were bringing that balance down. Then the next column is your PEPL levy. And you can see there at the top, it was $1 for 6 years, and that was to pay off some bonds for, I believe that was the expansion of the high school. Then we went, I think it's 11 years with just the regular 33-cent levy. And then in 2017-18, we went back to $1, and that was to fund the stadium. The next column then is our debt service levy. That's money that is levied to pay off bonds. And you'll notice that in 2014-15, that was our last payment on bonds, general obligation bonds. So we have not had any general obligation bonds for the last 5 years. And then that last column, you will see our total levy. That includes everything. You'll see our high year was in 2005-06. That also corresponds to, well, it's not the highest, but it was a pretty high levy that year for debt service, $1.75. But we were at $13.26. And then for this past year, we were at 9.78, almost 9.79. Just to give you an idea, there's a lot of schools in our conference that would be somewhere between 17 and 18. I do happen to know the business manager from Perry told me that they're the highest in the state. So I looked theirs up. They're at 20.79.
Wow.
So it kind of gives you an idea of where we're at compared to at least the highest one. And then on the bottom, I just put a little graph in there for those of you that are visual learners. Then the next page, I took a look at last year's general fund revenues, and you can see those at the top. And then at the bottom, I did a pie chart just to give you an idea of where our money actually comes from. You can see that the state is about 50%, and then property tax is about 38%. Our income surtax is about 3%, tuition and fees are about 5%. I also want to draw your attention to the federal money. That's 3%. You know, there's kind of a misconception that we get a lot of federal money to support the educational program. That's really not true. Most of that would be Title I funding. So then if you'll flip the page.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah.
With just thinking general fund, does the state get any federal funds that they distribute then to schools?
But I count those as federal.
You still count those as federal?
Yeah, the state, actually, I think all the federal funds that we receive are funneled through the state. So,
Okay.
And over the years, the amount of state sources has increased, property taxes decreased, and that's the state legislature is doing that on purpose. I mean, they are wanting to reduce the amount of property tax, and so they're taking on more of the burden. So that used to be pretty similar between the two, and over the years that has gradually shifted more to the state, and like I said, that's on purpose. So. Then the next sheet kind of gives you an idea of, in the general fund, where we spend our money. And as you might imagine, salaries and benefits compose the majority. About 80% goes to salaries and benefits. And you know, any time that a school district is looking to make budget cuts, that's one thing you always have to consider, is the fact that with that much of your budget going toward salaries and benefits, you almost have to make cuts in those areas. And then you can see supplies make up about 6%. Equipment, we don't buy a lot of equipment out of the general fund. That's because most of that would come from either silo or the PEPAL fund. And then the AEA flow through is about 4%. And then the last sheet on here, Casey's going to touch on this a little bit later, but I just kind of wanted to show you both the gifted and talented program and the at-risk and dropout program. Just to kind of give you an idea of the last 10 years, how that program looks. You can see our beginning balance each year, the receipts, expenditures, and then our ending balance. These are kind of opposite programs. If you look at gifted and talented, the receipts side has gone up, I think, well, did it go down a year? No, I don't think so. It's gone up pretty steady over the years. Our expenditures have been pretty steady as well. And you can see that the ending balance has just gradually built up. 10 years ago, we had an ending balance of about 150,000, and in 18-19, we ended with about a $250,000 balance. Then, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, this at-risk and dropout prevention program is all over the map. You can see that receipts have bounced all over. When you get down to about 2015-16, if you had much of a balance, they restricted what you could ask for. So that's why that went down significantly there. Our expenses have been fairly consistent there in the middle, but part of the issue there was that when they started the program, there were not a lot of constraints on what it could be spent for. Schools used it for, in our case, we use it for the alternative education program. We use it for partial funding of salaries of like guidance counselors and so forth. Well, you got to a point in this process where all of a sudden none of that was legal by the state's new interpretation. And it caused a lot of hand-wringing and rethinking. They have now since loosened that back up to where local entities have a lot of say-so in what they would like to spend it on and what's best for their district, rather than it coming down from the state. So this program, like I said, it's been a little bit all over the map. Last year we finished with a balance of about $63,000. So, any questions on any of this?
On the talented and gifted program, can you give the board an idea? What are the expenses? Are those people, or is that curriculums?
Yes.
Or
In our case, we're pretty consistent on our expenses. Kelly Borcher's salary comes out of there,
okay.
And half of Sandy Kluver,
Okay.
half of her salary. We also use it to pay for things like, the geography day, the expenses when they go to that. Any of those academic competitions, we take that out of here. Every once in a while, we will buy some equipment through there, but it's educational type stuff, but that's minor. So by far, the majority of the expenses there are just salaries and benefits of.
What about the receipts? Is that state funds that come there?
Yeah, and then it's got a 25% match of local funds.
So with this balance we've got there, are we getting to the point where we should be upping some expenditures there?
I think Casey's going to talk about that.
Yeah, that's
So-
right.
It looks to me like there's why we have money sitting there. We can invest it in.
Yeah.
It looks like we could.
I think part of the issue, to be honest with you, is how to spend it.
Yeah.
That's been the biggest, we've talked about this for the last 10 years, but I think the biggest question mark has been how do we spend that?
So are the majority of the funds being spent on talented gifted at the high school level and not at the lower? Is it scattered?
It's scattered throughout, yeah.
Okay.
But isn't it more for staff and where they're spend the most FTE portion? Isn't it mostly at the middle school level?
Probably, yeah,
Yeah.
I would say it's probably more. And when in a little bit, we have a document, I don't know, tag was a little bit harder, but you'll see some FTE information
Okay.
where tag's at in each of the buildings. So,
It's just not a curriculum that they have for TAG. Is it, are we paying for a
Right.
curriculum per se throughout the
I
different
mean,
levels?
if there's curricular needs, it gets paid for out of here, but we don't have, I don't believe we've got like a, yeah. So we'll keep that handy because we'll come back to it in a little bit here. A couple other documents that are in your folder. You've got one that looks like this, that's about enrollment. This came from, it may look familiar to some of you. This is from the IASB website. And so it has up through this year's enrollment. And you can see that's the first section, the certified and served enrollment as of October 2019. And then it goes to 2015. You can see those years. And then, so you can see, well, this just goes to 2015. I think I'm seeing that right. Yeah, 15. So 1,718 kids. And then this year we're certified at 1,701. And if you went out further, if you went backwards in years, over the last 10 years, if you looked at our enrollment, it's just kind of steady over that period of time. You see some years where we're up and we're down, but it's not, the line's just kind of flat. And I looked, the question is always, well, you know, how do you determine what's, you know, in the next 5 years, what is your enrollment going to do? And there's several ways you can do it. You know, you can just take the 5-year average and figure it's going to be that, or, you know, there's schools pay somebody to do a in-depth study on that. The DE has some information on their website, and I looked at it, and it goes out to 2023-24, and it shows us going from, it actually shows us increasing to 1,758 kids by that school year. So, you know, and they have some information on live births, but, you know, it's just really hard to say if that'll really happen. But I've seen times where they're pretty darn close, and then I've seen times where it's not close. So
Yeah, I would think that's pretty aggressive.
yeah. So if you go down through there, it also has per certified. You have students served per certified staff FTE, and that's as of 17-18. So that's not real current, but you can see that. And then it has some open enrollment numbers, open enrollment out. And you can see, we talked a little bit about that when we did enrollment. There's just kind of been a steady increase there. So we need to maybe dig into that a little bit. As I've looked at it just briefly, it's communities that are maybe on the fringes, and we're seeing some more families choose to open and roll out. It's a little bit closer, but that's about all the information I have at this point right now. And then if you turn the page, you see open enrollment in numbers. You can kind of see we were climbing from 15 to 17, and then we dropped a little bit since then. And so how open enrollment works is, so districts, you count your resident kids, and then if a kid open enrolls out, then the district sends that portion of the money to that district. And so you can see on this, they have some information about your open enrollment in revenue and your open enrollment out expense.
Is there a way to contact those families and see why in particular they're open enrolling out, if we're lacking in a program or something that is needed for those individuals?
Yeah, I think, you know, I've seen districts do surveys. I've seen situations where they just pick up the phone and start calling people. And that's probably where you get where you get the most, actually. So, yeah, we just need to sit down and look at some of those and reach out to them and find out. Yeah. So again, just a reminder, it's important to keep an eye on enrollment, because as you know, it's the main driver in terms of how our school's funded. But this is a little information for you on enrollment. Any other questions about that enrollment form? Then the next thing I would point you to is, and I apologize if the print is small, the one that says unspent authorized budget report. And then there's a one right behind it that says key assumptions. If you grab both of those. And again, you can kind of see Gary went through some things that gives you some history. And this form here gives us some history too, but then if you notice, it goes out to fiscal year 25 as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But if you look at right in the middle of the page, it says estimated FY19. First of all, that's really actual. Those numbers, we know those throughout that column. So you can see where we finished the year 19. And so let's stay in that column. And the first half of that page, you can, if you look over at the left, you see regular program district cost, and the number is 11,458,610. So a lot of that's, I mean, that is our funding from the state based on number of kids and that's where SSA is set. If you just keep walking down there, you'll see things. There's teacher salary supplement, so that's a categorical fund. We receive 956 in 19, 956,171 for TSS. And as you know, some of you know, TSS goes into teacher salaries. So our teachers everybody gets a chunk of it that's the same amount, and then there's a indexed amount that they get. But that has to be spent on those things. You see professional development, early intervention, teacher leadership is another one, and you can see that one was 0, and then in fiscal year 17 is when that started. It's important to know that this year, 572,722, that can only be spent on teacher leadership. So while it's been a commitment from our state, it doesn't help fund schools to a greater degree. You can keep walking down there. You'll see dropout prevention, allowable growth. That's what we talked a little bit about on Gary's sheets. Special education deficit, you see that one? Fiscal year 19, ours was 662,594. So we get that in authority. So we had a deficit, so we can make a request, which we did to the SBRC, and we get that in authority. So that if you follow that all the way down to maximum district cost, you'll see for fiscal year 19 it's $16,959,515,000. And then you can follow that over to fiscal year 20 and you see a little over 17.5 million. But if you stay there and keep going down, you'll see then preschool funding, 629,000 in fiscal year 19, 816. Instructional support, and you'll see that started back in 15 we didn't have that, and starting in 16 we did. Miscellaneous income. And then unspent authorized budget from previous year. So schools you only have the authority to spend so much money. And so what that's saying is at the end of that fiscal year, we had that amount left in authority that we didn't spend. From the previous year that gets brought forward. And then that gives you the total maximum authorized budget. So the most we could have spent in fiscal year 19 was $28,327,000. Then the next line is expenditures, and you can see we spent $19,914,321. Okay, leaving a balance of $8 million for 12. So the next thing I would point out, so some may be looking at that thinking, okay, we need to spend more, and that may be the case. And we're going to talk about the possibility of spending some more tonight. The one thing that if you look, see that the second from the bottom line says annual authorized budget. You still want to try to, what you got to try to do is still be, if you bite off too big of a chunk and things kind of multiply quickly, and so that we just would want to try to make sure that we're spending, if we continue to spend, or we try to maybe spend more in line with what we're giving in each year to spend, and we stay consistent there, then we wouldn't create a situation where out in fiscal year 25, for example, where you see a red number. That's what you don't want to have. Okay, which you don't see any red numbers as you go forward here. So, as I said, we went through fiscal year 19, which was last year, and then you see 20, which we know a lot about fiscal year 20. We don't know yet what our expenses are. That's the big thing. And there's a couple other, we don't know what our special ed deficit is yet at the end of this year. You can see I put in there $550,000. It may be higher than that, but that's what I put.
When she did the audit, the special ed audit, did she find anything that would reduce that? Because we basically doubled the money that we were in the red for the special ed from the year before. Mm-hmm. Did she find anything that we need to be looking at to make it better?
Well, I think we're looking at some things that we can do in terms of how we utilize our teacher associates. There's some places there. That's only gonna do so much. I think you'll see. I think if you looked into this deeper, it is a trend across our state. We're not alone. And I think also we can't forget that as special ed funding is impacted by how our state funds education as well. And we know that we're in a period of time where we've seen historically low increases to SSA now, student supplemental aid, and that impacts special ed as well.
Because I know we had the problem probably back in 15, Gary and Rob really focused on it, and we got it a little under control the next year.
Yeah, there's some things we can do, and we're taking some steps to reduce some of those costs. There's some things that are really So when a teacher and a principal and AEA staff and parents are sitting in an IEP meeting, never in that conversation is it discussed about, can we afford that? We don't get to have that. We don't get to have that conversation. But we can be a little more clear about, what warrants TA support, what doesn't, those kind of things. And so I think we're trying to be a little more careful about doing, having our ducks more in a row as we go into that meeting between our staff and the AEA. And then there's sometimes where a student might need para support, but not all day. And so we might be able to match 2 or 3 kids with a para TA. I sometimes still call them paras. I know we call them TAs here, but so we're working on that. Now, a lot of superintendents will say, well, don't worry about special ed deficit because you actually get that back in authority. But I mean, ultimately, we want to try to make sure we're being good stewards of the funds that we get. But I want to get back to some of these things. Then we have to make projections, and so we have on like special education deficit. You can see I 550, which I don't know, that might not be very close. And then you see I put 525 for the remaining years. You can see that on several things. So that brings us to the next page on the back. Or the next page that goes with this on key assumptions. So in order to make projections, you've got to make some assumptions. And so really what we're saying there is, trying to make our best educational guess on where some of these things will be. So we made some projections on enrollment. Again, I think just kind of a modest, this is just based on maybe just some slight increases over the years from 20 to 25. Well, 21 to 25. And then we put in our special education enrollment. Preschool enrollment, we kept pretty steady. Dropout prevention number is pretty similar. And then I want to take you down if you see staffing changes. So this tool allows you to, so what if we added staff? What would that mean for this report? Which, I didn't say this, but I think this is the most important report that we have to pay attention to, because if you have an authority problem, it's a challenge to get that reversed. So this report is based on if we added 3 teachers. We know that we have, I put 5 teachers leaving there, that might be 4 actually. And then adding 1 administrator, which is on the agenda tonight. So you can see if we did that, we still are setting in a situation where, and again, I also have SSA at 2%, so I think that's fairly conservative.
What about the next year you have 2.4? Are you just hopeful?
I'm hoping that it'll be, right now, the House is at 2.5 and the Senate's at 2.1. Last week when I was in Des Moines, there was a lot of discussion. They think it'll be around 2.4. So I don't know, it could be less. So that gives you an idea of if those things happen that way, here's where we would be. And so the nice thing about Forecast 5, which you heard about at the convention, is we can go back and run a scenario that if our enrollment dropped by 100 kids in 5 years, we can see what that does. We can play with those numbers to see, but this is kind of our base, just kind of our base scenario. This is what the end result looks like on this unspent balance sheet.
Where are you seeing the end result?
Well, on this sheet, there's not an end result, I'm sorry, but
Project.
yeah, so back to this sheet here, based on these key assumptions, we're saying out in fiscal year 25, we would still have an unspent authorized budget of 11 million.
With adding that additional
Even
staff?
with adding those. Yep. And if you changed enrollment, like I don't have, like that we're gonna grow by a crazy amount, that's a pretty small number. So if it would decrease by that amount, with us growing our unspent balance every year, I still feel pretty confident that we would not be in a situation where any of those numbers are gonna be in jeopardy of being read.
So it's the balance between people leaving
Yeah.
and the student ratios remaining constant.
And that's replacing the leaving people too, right? It's just adding 3 additional and
Mhm.
replacing the leaving ones?
And what this does is, so what we do is we put a number in on, so if 5 teachers left, what do we think the cost savings is in those 5 teachers? And we have a pretty conservative number in there as well. I think I've got 15,000, which some years you don't see any, or some positions you don't see any, and then others you might see 25. So 25,000. And then also notice for teachers leaving, I put 5 this year, 5 the next year, because we know early retirement, and I have none. And there I'm thinking, we haven't made any decisions on early retirement, and so I just put none in there.
How many is it the average every year, would you say?
Teachers leaving.
So we've only done early retirement every other
Every
year
other
since I've been on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you'll have some leave that
Right.
just move or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. The last couple years, we've had quite a few leave just
When they
because they
didn't get
moved or
Or
something.
they just decided to retire
Yeah.
and not get the.
Yeah, that's true too.
So there's usually something every year then.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So any questions on these two documents?
It's very helpful in case they like
Okay.
that to see out.
Do you run this like once a year, twice a year? Or?
We can do it anytime. I mean, the time, it's usually this time of year where you're running different scenarios. And if you know, as we get into this discussion more, if there's other scenarios you want me to run, it's not complicated to do, so.
Maybe one question for Gary on the unspent authorized budget. They talked about a range from 15 to 25%. We're kind of bumped just right at that, a little above it, and kind of shows we could trend to be a little higher than that. And I'm not aware of any real consequence for that. It's a target. But Gary, any negative impact could come by letting that get too high on that. I mean, because it's an authority to spend. It's not real
Right.
money. So
I think the only thing is if you let it get too high, then people could legitimately say, well, you should be spending more of that money on the kids rather than just banking it. You will see that, at least some of the information I've seen, you'll see some small schools that are really nervous about their future, and they will have extremely high unspent balance because of that. They're just kind of hoarding money.
yeah.
Well,
My point on that was this. It's not a situation like if you look at, okay, we got an unspent balance this year of $8 million. That's not cash sitting in the bank that we're not spending.
Yeah.
It's the authority to spend that money,
right.
and that can create a misconception in the public's eye.
And I think you'll find school administrators, Rob, Casey, myself, very hesitant to go overboard because Casey's been through it. We've only been through it once.
Yeah.
But when you have to reduce the budget and you're starting to talk about layoffs and so forth,
Because you
that's
don't
not
have, you're talking because you don't have the
Yes.
authority. To,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very unpleasant
Yes, yes, it is.
situation to go through. So we always kind of err on the conservative side.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah, and tonight we don't have much about our cash in the bank, because that's another whole set of books almost, but we're in good shape there too, just in general, I mean, just a general statement. But, yeah, districts can be in a situation where they've got cash in the bank that they can't spend it because they don't have the authority.
Right. And I just kind of brought the question up because of the newer board members, to kind of get
Yeah.
that terminology
Yeah.
and understand that that doesn't mean that that's a pile of money to spend that. If you have it.
The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about in the workshop here is that there's another document in your packet, and it's the staffing plan. And I want to preface the discussion here with this is kind of a working document right now, so I want to give you a sense of what we've been talking about and putting together as we look at how our schools are staffed this year. You see the first page is for Fairview Elementary, and in the very almost the middle of the page, 1920 is more on the right side, and then 2021 is the left. And you can see what we're for preschool. This year we have 4 teachers, 109 kids, and we don't know our enrollment yet for preschool for next year. The things that we've been doing so far, we're feeling pretty good about our enrollment, but we don't know that number yet. So you can follow that down. You can see kindergarten, first grade, second grade, our numbers, and then you can also see what our class sizes are for each of those grades.
first grade, that looks pretty big.
I was just thinking that if you're gonna have 143 kids or 140 kids.
Well, for kindergarten, right.
But
The one
for
thing,
next year, we're in first grade.
but what, we gotta look at that because not all those kids will go to first grade, so we gotta first see.
Okay.
Sue just said they had 30 to 40 kids
Yeah,
retained.
yeah,
Okay,
So that would drop that significantly then.
yeah,
okay.
I haven't asked them, we won't know till conferences.
right.
Okay. That would get you back down to about that 107, 110 or
So
something.
those are conversations that Sue and I are having about, and Crystal about those class sizes. And then you can see PE and you can see music, we share staff, so so 0.75 means 0.75 FTE, so full-time equivalent. So 3/4 of a staff person does PE at Fairview. And you can see tag, we talked about tag earlier, 0.2. ELL. Then if you turn the page, you'll see the same thing for Adams Elementary. So this year in third grade, we have 131 kids, and that class goes to fourth grade next year. That's one we're still having a discussion about. There's 6 sections of third grade, 5 of fourth, and so Sue and I will get that nailed down. But if you get the same thing, you see next year we're looking at third grade being 112 kids, so less, so it could be we move a teacher there. You can follow that down and see the other things, and then you notice, again, I'll just point it out because we talked about it earlier, tag is 0.25 at Adams. Then you turn the page, you see middle school, you see the same thing. 5th grade, we know that we're going to have our 4th grade going to 5th grade next year is smaller than this year's 5th grade. And so Mr. Raymond and I have discussed that, and we're going to have 5 sections instead of 6 for 5th grade next year. So then when you get to 7th grade, it's a little different because we have an English language arts teacher, a math teacher, a science teacher, social studies, and you can see I have listed, we have one of each of those in 7th grade and 8th grade. And you can see the specials or the outside the core classes, what we have for FTEs. And then you turn the page and you see the rest of them. So nurse, another one you'll notice a little inconsistent is our nurse. So we have 2 and 2.5, maybe 2 point, a little less than that, nurses in the district, and they cover each of the buildings. So you see 0.75, Mrs. McCartan, I think, is at the middle school about that amount of time. Right, would that be right?
3 days, she's there Monday.
Yeah,
Wednesday,
and then
Friday.
Teresa Paco's up there some too, so that's where the 0.75 comes from. Tag 0.625, and that's the highest FTE of tag you'll see is at the middle school.
That 8th grade class of 155, that's gonna be one of the larger units we've had for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Going into the high school.
Yeah.
I showed up big in our church kids for confirmation, we went from like 5 kids to 12. So that's just a big group.
So then you turn the page, you got high school, you see the same type of thing, but high school is different in that we still want to know how many kids per grade, but then so then we have 4 math instructors you'll see. And you'll see science, how many we have. This year, in science, for example, we have 3, plus one of our counselors teaches a science class. You can see that. So then if you keep flipping, you'll get to the end of high school, and then you'll see just some, you'll see administration, you'll see some of our district-wide positions, how many we have of those. tonight later on the agenda, we're talking about what a position which I'm calling Director of Teaching and Learning that we don't currently have. If we added that, there would be one of those next year, which we'll get more into that later. The other thing that, in terms of positions that I have to talk about is in the area of special education. Looking at the need to start a program to better serve the needs of kids that we think we would be able to reach down from elementary up to maybe even the lower end of the high school, depending on the makeup of the classroom and the needs of students. So that's something more that we'll talk about later. But I wanted to share this with you so you, number one, you know that we're looking at these our number of FTEs and our staffing across the district closely, not just, well, this sounds good, let's come in here and talk to the board about it. We are trying to analyze where we're at and where we think our needs are. Now, that being said, I'm sure if you today would have walked through our buildings and got the opinions of staff, you'd hear a variety of things in terms of where they think we need to add staff or that kind of thing. So that's important to know. But any questions on this?
Why is tag so different in each building? It's like, why are they at the middle school so much? Are they doing something besides talented and gifted programs out there?
Mrs. Borcher does do exploratory, I think. So she's there for that.
And he said specials per planning period and lunch.
Right.
That's included in that too.
Oh, in his, or in the
In
middle
the
school one?
FTE, you know.
I'd like to look into tag and
Yeah.
see, because I don't know if we're doing the best approach with our
Right.
tag dollars that we could be doing, where it would benefit more than a very select few of students.
Yep, and that's one of the ones when we had our administrative meeting Thursday that the principals and I talked about quite a bit, and right behind the two we're talking to you tonight about, it's likely that will come with tag. But what the approach that we feel we need to take there is, we also want to not just hire a teacher and maybe do exactly what we've been doing. So what are the best way to serve tag students
Right.
across the district? And that discussion would come through looking at our tag plan. So we're going to try to accelerate that process a little bit, but it is one that we're going to come talk to you about. Again, you saw earlier what those the balances in tag. So that's a categorical fund that, again, we can't go, well, this year we'll use some tag money to pay X, Y, or Z. We can't do that. There are a few funds where the board could, through a resolution, decide to use funds, but tag isn't one of those. So it is one that we need to, we feel like we have some money that we could probably expand the number of FTEs that we have in tag.
So your objective is to try to look into that with that new position and make sure that we're doing what's best for all students of the district?
Well, we want to review our plan, and so some of these things are going to kind of have to happen at the same time.
Right.
And at the same, come back to you with a recommendation to add a staff person based on the fact that here's what we think we could do to better serve tag kids after evaluating our plan.
I know at the district I worked at before we moved up here, we had tag was used. We had kids split up into 3 areas for something major like math. And if they didn't understand the concept that was being taught, then they would go into the reteach room. If they were just on pace and understanding correctly, they stayed in the regular room. Or if they needed extended, if they were above where they needed and they needed to extend their learning, then the tag teachers are the ones that came in and taught the extension.
Sure.
So it worked really well because, some people are really gifted in math but not gifted in reading, but they got that extra help in math that do that.
Well, we talked about, high school tag services look different than they maybe do in the lower grades, and so we're not necessarily looking to add something so we can have more pull-out things. We want to try to more of the stuff you're talking about, things that can happen between the tag teacher and the regular classroom teacher, you know, some of those kind of things. So, any questions about any of that I presented on in terms of the budget? Budget information, that really wasn't the budget that we presented. It was just some key financial indicators and information, and really some information and data that would help you be able to make an informed decision on some things that are on the agenda tonight.
It's very been helpful, just to actually have a run through of this year, we're doing this, last year we did some history, so it's neat to see.
That's all that we had prepared for you. Just so you know though, some of this information, you'll see some connections when we get into the certified budget, and some of it is a little hard to see the connections, and we'll try to make them for you, but the certified budget, especially the tax rate information, that's going to be really valuable as we get into the certified budget in the next month here. So.
This is the information that typically Rob would present when the budget was pretty well ready to go. A rough draft was ready. Well, you're just getting it a little early this year, and so it kind of gives you some background before we really get started on it. So.
It's helpful. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Karen.
Nope.
Moving on. Any questions about the agenda? Any motion to approve the agenda?
We start before.
Yeah, we kind of
Our
did.
time.
We never. Pardon me?
Can we start before our college time?
Because there might be
Oh,
people
5
still
minutes?
coming.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Take
sorry.
I'd like
Oh, I'm
to-
sorry. I thought.
Well,
I'd like.
we aren't ahead very often.
I'd like to start early.
I figured we're just gonna roll
If we got
through.
published start time, I don't know if we should start ahead of that. That's all I'm
Gotcha,
saying.
gotcha. Okay. You're right, it's right there,
So,
5:30.
5-minute bathroom break.
Let's take a break. Be back at 5:29.
Yeah.
It was just, that hasn't changed, but what was then Highway 75 is now, and I think about all the people that want 30 to bypass Carroll, it killed that corridor for business. Alton was so good in that, because I lived in Alton the first 7 years of my married life, and it was just such a nice area. Worked part-time as a custodian at Floyd Valley, and before it became MOC, alphabet soups. There was a really good restaurant called the OK Cafe, and it was just, these bypasses are nice, but like a truck stop in Lamar's is just a local little, like MC's Cafe, because there's no reason for a truck to stop in the city. And it's quick, it's slick. Yeah, the only town that seemed to kind of hold their own is Sheldon. Sheldon's always been a little ahead of the curve. I remember talking to Carroll Clausen, and he said, "Oh, I was city manager. You'd never heard of it." And I went, "Where?" And he goes, "Sheldon." And I went, "My husband drove for Van White." I know Sheldon rather well. Yeah, it would have been for you. Would that have been your closest shopping center?
And then Fort Spencer.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's the hop skip.
Okay.
Our civic assembly is yeah, we try to go
Let me get
Spencer
started now.
1 year, Sioux City couples, and then Council Bluffs. So that we're kind of serving the whole district.
My motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Annika? Cindy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Dwayne?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes. Moving forward. Consent agenda. Minutes from 2020, which
I didn't see anything wrong in my
anything? Anybody has some comments about that? Bill list?
I did bills, everything looked good. The one thing that Gary brought up was that the month before, we had a very high water and sewage bill at the middle school. And so he had asked Jeff to look into it, and it was an error in billing or something, so they hadn't billed us for another month or something.
And then, for some reason, that building is high. Jeff and I visited with it. It has to do with the boiler, and he's working on a solution to that too. So,
State wrestling?
Those are just some of some extra bills.
yeah, it's just
that's
part of the bills.
Yeah.
Sign that, and then
Yeah.
state swim, again, meal money, they
Mhm.
have to be fed. Bill list for general fund. Okay, moving on to resignations.
Yeah, we have resignation from Kimberly Preston as a special education preschool teacher associate at Fairview. At the end of the 1920 school year, she's been with us this year.
And then, so that's it. Field trips,
yeah.
FFA.
Then we got a couple of field trips. State swimming is on there. And then also, yeah, the state FFA convention in Ames, it's actually not till April. But you can see some of the plans they have in your packet. He's got our teacher, Mr. H. He's got a letter and some information on that.
Sounds like a good time. And they're still qualifying for that, sounds like. Or some of the different.
Some of the different things that go on, yeah. Yep.
Anything to be withdrawn from the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Cindy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Dwayne?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Annika?
Yes.
Okay. The school calendar.
Karen, so is there anybody here?
Anybody here to say anything? We'll have comments about the calendar, school calendar?
Yeah, although
This one's a little
it's not
less
really a
formal
formal
than,
public hearing.
than
It's more
one by
of a public comment.
Did you want to comment on that?
Oh, the one thing about the calendar that you'll see later for approval, actually, in your folder, there's an updated calendar, because this afternoon, one of our committee members pointed out an error on there that many of us missed up to this point, that that affects the end date. So if you compare the one in your folder to the one in the packet, board packet of information in March, the very last week of March, it had March 29th, 30th, 31st, and then it says 28, 29 for Thursday and Friday, which affected the total number of days. We had 5 days there, and then the number of hours were reflective of 5 days. So That was an error, so we had to take that out. So that actually makes our last day of school would be May 25th, which is still before Memorial Day. And in which case, graduation was, we were still proposing graduation for both schools be on the 23rd. It has to be on the 23rd now with the last day of school being on the 25th. So. But we had our committee, fact-finding committee, it met a couple times, and went to the calendar commission, and then that's how it got to the point where we're at today.
And this is just the public hearing, right? We'll talk about
Yep.
it later on for the
Yep.
agenda.
All right. So, moving forward. Donations.
We had one donation from Mid-Iowa Insurance for $400. That was for the fundraiser that they did before Christmas to raise money for unpaid lunch balances. They split their proceeds between the two schools.
That's great, thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the donation.
Second.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Dwayne?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Annika?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
School improvement report. Who would like to go first?
It was
Okay, so the packet that I gave you includes the pyramid that's on the front, and that looks like this. If you can kind of follow along, I brought the MTSS leadership team. We've got Peggy Hamilton, 2nd grade, Candace Ostrich, kindergarten, Holly Warnke, preschool. We've got Sarah Schrader, 1st grade, Sarah Hamilton, 3rd grade, Ashley Ehrenholz, Title I, and Ryan Simile, 4th grade, and then Crystal Bass, assistant principal. And then Kathy Helber couldn't be here tonight, so Crystal's gonna take over her part. So we wanna kind of show you what we're doing for improvement. So looking at the pyramid, and I think probably Jan and Dwayne probably have seen this pyramid or something with MTSS in the past. And so the pyramid kind of indicates that, you know, we want most of our kids to be successful with core instruction. So you're gonna see about 80 to 90% ideally of students proficient in that area. And then we've got kind of our targeted group with, if you're familiar with the way we handle reading, it would be our Tiger Time, some of those things in that targeted group. They need a little bit of extra. And then you see that our kids that are more intensive may need, you know, special ed services. Even some of our Title I would fit into that intensive area. So we're kind of looking at that and trying to figure out how we can make it work. So, so I'm going to kind of, and also to see that it's a match with PBIS, our behaviors. So when we have a bus referral, you know, we'd like for 80 to 90% of our students to be successful without, you know, just following the basics, the PBIS basics at both buildings. But then we've got that extra, maybe, you know, bus referrals. You know, what do we do for those kids? You know, we talk to them, we call the parents, we do some things. Some kids need instruction. Some students have behavior plans at the intensive level. So they really kind of match our academic this side and then our behavioral on that side kind of work together. We still need that universal instruction. We still need targeted instruction for kids who aren't making it up entirely in universal. And we also need intensive for those maybe some extreme learning needs or extreme behaviors. So that's kind of the foundation of our whole MTSS leadership team. We've had MTSS for a long time. If you flip to the 2nd page, this isn't just a Carroll. This is the foundation for the whole entire state of Iowa. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just want you to look that it's a decision-making framework. So trying to meet with those BATs, the building assistance teams, meeting with parents, meeting with students, and trying to solve those problems. What kind of academic things, additions can we make to help students that are having difficulty in the academic areas or behavioral areas? So what we want is basically the 5 components that I printed in blue there. We need an evidence-based curriculum and instruction for universal. And today we had Journeys, we're on our 2nd year of Journeys reading, and the board approved that purchase. Today we had 2 reps in from 2 different math companies. We were on a 7-year cycle. We had paid ahead 7 years. This is the end of the 7 years, so we have to find a way to meet next year's math needs. So we had the reps come in today, and that within the by the next board meeting, my hope is that we can make a recommendation to the board for math materials, because we have to purchase math materials one way or another. It's not an option. We just need to decide what's the best. And we found that with our Go Math, while it was really good, 7 years ago, we're finding that it's not quite meeting, it's not building the rigor in that we really need. And the assessment piece is something I think all of these teachers are really interested in improving on. How do we know if those kids are being successful? And it goes back to our pyramid. How do we know? How can we help ensure that kids are being successful? The next one is the universal screening for our FAST. We fall, winter, spring, you need to, in the state of Iowa, screen for reading 3 times. That's mandatory. And then finding those interventions for those kids that are having a difficult time. Maybe they're in this, having a difficult time with just driving on the universal. They need a targeted, perhaps a TA working with them, something like that. And then intensive for, some of our teachers that support the kids when they have those needs. Progress monitor, students are identified by the state on the student success side. We know which students need to be progress monitored at a minimum every week, or a minimum number of students that are progress monitored every week. But we also sometimes have those kids that are made target that we progress monitor because we can choose to progress monitor. But the state does say you must progress monitor students who have not met benchmark, at least 2 previous testing benchmarking windows. So that's another piece. And then, like I said, the database decision-making going throughout the system. So what I really want to turn it over to is we're going to start with each teacher here is going to do a little presentation. We're going to start with Title I, go to preschool, and then all the way through. And then at the end, I'll just have a couple comments then I'll make. So let's start. Yeah.
Hi. If you turn to our Title I section, we gave an overview. The biggest thing I want to highlight is now that we're a 4-member team, we don't feel so stretched in the fact that we can make sure we are working with every student who needs support K through 3, and that is huge. In the past, we've had to step back from 3rd grade or change up and haven't been able to work with kindergartners until almost the 4th quarter. So that's a huge change. And we have a big data point with kindergarten showing 11% growth from just fall to winter scores in our first year of trying that. So it's a big learning process for us, but we've really enjoyed it. Another thing have a set curriculum now in our title program under collaborative classrooms, SIPs, which is phonics based heavily. And this is our 2nd full year. Becky Roberts and myself have spent the last quarter of 3 years ago learning it, practicing it, kind of dabbling in it before implementing it to a full year. And so those are the big takeaways from it. Data with our SIPs is there's some highlighted points of our 2nd graders. Those will be our first group that will have it the full time from start, where we started full year implementation, and they're maintaining their accuracy, which is the thing we're tracking most. At the end of 2nd grade, they were 100% accurate, and going into 3rd grade fall, they were 90%, which we have waiver room that, some might lose a little bit, but the fact that that was only 2 kids out of everyone we worked with, we were pretty excited about. So we've added a ton of distributive practice to our routine. We try to take on all of that. We train, track the growth, and do that for the teachers, and just ask them to help with our scheduling of it, and they've done everything they can do to help us with that, so we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm just going to highlight some of the things that we've changed in this last year for preschool. We're in our 5th year of having the teaching strategies creative curriculum kits. So there's a few things that we have changed once we've got into it and really worked it. Each day the guide has you teaching 1 small group, and so it's either math or literacy. We have added a 2nd small group in, so they have a small group of math and literacy every day. So I'll be teaching 1 small group, and then one of our TAs will be teaching the other small group, and the kids switch so they get both small groups every day, and that's been a major benefit to have. Also, we went to a reading class a couple years ago and started EAK, which is an enhanced alphabet knowledge. And it's very scripted, research-based way of teaching the alphabet. You teach a letter a day, the uppercase, lowercase, what sound it makes, how you write it, finding it in the print. But with that, we have added a strip. Kim Shields gave us a choral reading review that helps you teach the letter sounds. And so we do 5 letters a day, and we do that choral review where I do it, we do it together, they do it, we do it together again. So they're getting those letter sounds that way also. And then last spring, we took a 2-day math class. And in that class, we learned a lot of different strategies to help with number sense. And one of them was counting collections. And it's where they pick an odd bag. They can count with a partner to help their counting. They can count on their own, but then they also have a data sheet where they're going to write that number, they're going to circle the number, and they're also going to draw that set out. So that's really helped. And I know Candace has said she saw a great improvement. We just started it last year in April. This will be our first year implementing it all year. And their number sense has grown great from that.
Thank you, Rob.
So the exciting thing about all that is that kindergarten is seeing some spiraling between Title I and preschool because our growth was 11%, and so we feel like implementing that Title I earlier in our year has shown that growth in the winter. And also with our math scores, we did the FAST math for the first time this winter, and we saw a big jump in what the kids knew from what they have already been taught in preschool. So being able to have that number identification and making those sets and being able to show us those things. We've also worked really hard at using our FAST data a little bit more efficiently so we can identify those skills that need to be addressed so that child can get to benchmark quicker. We also feel like having our seventh classroom this year has also been able to reduce our class sizes so we can better meet those small groups. In years past, that's been really difficult to do, but this year we are doing a better job of getting those guided reading groups in and using those math guided reading groups where needed. So we're just really excited about starting to see some of that spiraling that we've been working on. So,
Thank you.
For reading, we really worked hard on distributive practice. Title was great. They helped us with creating some activities that the kids can practice every day. So in addition to their core and their small groups, they're going to get, whether it's a foster grandparent or a teacher associate helping them, so they're just getting that additional practice. Kind of piggybacking off of what Candace said, we've been using the Panorama site to really use our data and tracking those students and interventions and their growth and making sure that we're putting everything in place that we can so that they're making the growth we'd like to see. We've analyzed our FAST data from this winter so that we can see our Tiger Time groups, and we can make sure that each student has their needs being met, whether it's decoding skills or CBC words, sight words, fluency. And something really exciting, it's our second year of implementation for Journeys. So we've been able to dig a lot deeper. We've been doing a lot with close readers where students are able to read a passage and we are focusing on, they have to use their text evidence and go back and highlight or circle information, working on that comprehension skill. And then we've also added on Thursdays that to go along with our passage for the week, the comprehension skill, we are really working on that they have to write their answers out. So instead of, if it's a multiple choice question like, how is the rabbit feeling? Happy. Well, using your text evidence, what tells you how are they feeling, and having them kind of write a little bit more about that. So hopefully that will help in 2nd and 3rd grade with comprehension. And then with math, we just wanted to have a little bit more of a spiral to practice all of our standards. So we created a Google Doc each day, and we're practicing each skill and standard to make sure that they're not losing that growth. If we practice place value in October and we're not seeing it again for the rest of the year, but they're going back, and we have about 5 minutes of our warm-up where they're just practicing that each day. And then we've been doing a lot with CGI problems and open-ended questions, just working on helping them to be better mathematical thinkers. So with open-ended questions, it might be something like, I have 19 cents, how much money do I have, or what coins could I have? And so some students, it might be great that they can think of 19 pennies, and another student might come up with 10 different ways that they can share that. And then they're sharing their ideas and their strategies with the class. So we've really seen some growth in their number sense and their mathematical thinking with that.
Thank you, Sarah.
And then I'll just go on from there. We're also using the Panorama site. We have more data than we've ever had in my 36 years. We can really look at where students are. We're making very informed decisions on how to help them, not just the bottom kids, but the top kids too. We want to stretch everybody. We're using our TQ time, our teacher quality time, to dig into journeys more, to add science and social studies standards into those stories because we don't really have a separate time for that. We meet as PLCs once a week, which is awesome. We have a very cohesive team, and I just feel like we're really making great progress in that direction as well. So.
So a lot of what you've heard is the same for third grade, but one thing we've done this year with Journeys is we've rewritten our universal core routine that all third grade teachers follow, and that helped us dig a little bit deeper into the comprehension aspect of reading, because that was one area that we thought our students needed to improve on. With the comprehension, Kim Shields has been helping us implement reciprocal teaching, which also helps them dig deeper into, it could be an article, it could be a chapter in a book, it can really be applied to lots of different areas. And so they're getting that along with fluency strategies in core and in Tiger Time. So that's been really positive. Also using the Panorama site to really look at our interventions and making sure that we're making progress where we need to. Math, we've done differentiated math groups within the classroom, and then we've started doing it whole grade, so it's kind of like a Tiger Time for math, which has been beneficial because we can push the kids who need to be stretched. They get differentiation, and our students who maybe don't understand the concept, they get a little bit more time and access to a little bit smaller group instruction there. With our planning, I don't know if you've talked to Mrs. Shields about the IPI model, but in our planning, we're trying to focus more on the 5s and 6s, which is more student engagement, more student-led discussions in the classrooms. So we're using that and just really using that student data to drive where instruction needs to go. And then social emotional skills. Each third grade class does a morning meeting, and so we're able to address areas that students need, and then that also helps us help our counselor with small group instruction of social emotional.
Thank you, Sarah.
What I'm going to say is going to sound like a broken record because a lot of it has already been said. For reading, again, like previously mentioned, this is our second year of Journeys, and so we're becoming more familiar with it and knowing the strengths as well as the shortcomings of it. So one thing that the fourth grade has done is gone through and really looked at our week of instruction and find out how best can we utilize that instruction. And so we have come together and standardize a routine that all fourth grade teachers are addressing, break it down by day, what materials we're going to use, and so that way all the fourth grade students are receiving the same instruction for reading. For math, last spring we had the opportunity to do some more in-depth looking at our standards and benchmarks, looking at the clusters for the major supporting and additional clusters of our math. And so what we did is really identified which lessons are more important for our students to know. And so we really dug deeper and to help develop a deeper understanding for those math concepts rather than simply teaching and then moving on. And so with that, we've also noticed, like Mrs. Rook said, was our Go Math being 7 years old, there has been some some rigor that's not there anymore. And so we have utilized some other types of curriculum for different skills, such as place value and fractions to kind of beef up that rigor that we've noticed that's kind of lacking. For writing, one of the things that after looking at our ISAF scores from last year, we realized that we really need to beef up our writing. And so what we've been doing for our teacher quality time is looking at what are they asking, what do they want us to teach, and assess for the ISAFs for writing, and then look at those writing checklists and make sure we're teaching those skills within our classroom. And then one thing that we did identify after this past NWEA test period was a lot of the skills that we once thought the students had mastered, they are starting to forget. And so one thing that we've noticed with our instruction is we need to do a little bit more spiral review. And so by incorporating something called the dailies, really going through and hitting on those skills that we've already talked about, and allow them for more reteaching and for further mastery.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, then our specials, our related arts team, when they started the MTSS system here, they incorporated specials teachers, so they're each working with a grade level and then teaching that Tiger time. So they all have a reading group. Some have middle of the road kids, some are extension kids, but fitting in to where they can pull kids, create smaller groups, but it also shows the kids that all teachers think your reading is important. And you know, even our teachers that teach us music or drawing or PE, this is important, and we want to model good reading for all of our students, and they make connections with all teachers, so we wanted to include them. In addition, they try to incorporate literature into their classroom work too. So I've been in classrooms in the art room where she's used a book to present an idea, and then they create an art project out of that. In music, they're working on concerts coming up based around a book, and so I think that'll be really neat to showcase as well. So they help us model good reading for all of our students.
Thank you, Crystal. Just a few comments, just so you realize how big this organization is for academics. We have 53 teachers that between the two buildings. We use 2 of Jerry's teachers that come, art and music, that come in, so that's 55 teachers. Of those 55 teachers that we use for Tiger Time instruction, 2 do not. So we're down to 53 teachers we put in to work with all of our teams, you know, kindergarten through 4th grade. They help out, and as Crystal indicated, our specials teachers are helping with enrichment classes, higher classes, or in a case if you're certified as a classroom teacher, you can work with students that may be more deficits. So as we do, one of our teachers is. So you can see it's everyone working together. So, and when you take out the 2 that I subtracted there, that would include Natasha Adams, which is shared amongst all 4 buildings, and Sandy Kluver, which is a shared amongst all 4 buildings, still working on core or interest of reading too. And so you see that our package of 55 teachers is really tight, and when they talk, I mean, we're a close-knit group, and this has happened, the culture has happened, you know, over many years, trying to build that teamwork and working with, these are also, I forgot to say, they are all PLC leaders, so they work with their teams, leading their teams, planning the agenda, keeping the meetings going every week, and that's within contract day. So you can see that we have a real tight organization here. And one little visual that I brought. Okay, so when Amy started working with us many years ago, I remember when Wendy Robinson said, it's about the package. And okay, we're talking about hundreds of kids here, and each one of those kids, because of these teachers, have created and found that there's not all kids are the same. You can have 24 kids in the room and there's not one of them that's like anybody else. Their needs vary depending on the academics or the behavior, but we look at the package, the entire package. What can we do to help support those kids? And these teachers, along with their colleagues, the other 50-some or 40-some teachers are working together to tighten up that package. And I wish I would have brought my
plan.
Anyway, but thank you. And do you have any questions for these presenters?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I don't have a question. I just have, if you have anything that's on your wish list, take it to Sue. And, I mean, that's the. that's
Whatever
how
it
we-
is.
Well, she's still here. No, in all seriousness, if you have something on your wish list that I wish we could do this, or I wish we had this resource, please run it through your administrators. We want to help you out. I personally want to thank you on behalf of the board for all you do, because we know you do a lot, so.
And we'd like to extend that back to you as well. Thank you.
And I'm serious
as
about the
board
wish
members.
list. I mean, because sometimes you're probably in a class or working with kids and you have, man, I wish we did this, or I wish we had this, or this resource. Please run it up. And, because we want to put as many resources in your hands as we can. So, okay?
Thank you for coming. You don't have to stay, you could stay for the rest of the meeting.
I'm bringing this all here to look at. You brought a picture one year.
But no
Yeah, you've seen me play a
Oh.
What else was it? A bell? Did you have a bell one year?
I maybe brought an umbrella. I don't know, but
You never know what you're
no,
gonna
but that way, remember what I said something.
I just think it's good, Sue, that you have a target on that package, by golly.
Really? Hit the target, we're going for it. It just happened to be one I grabbed. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
In the school or the school report, this one or this one, right? Okay. I got you. Okay. Open for employment, what's on the last page?
Personnel report. We have several things on our personnel report in terms of hire. Our recommendations tonight are Tammy McKenzie's recommending Patty Groves for the high school science position. She has 21 years of teaching experience in a variety of school districts, and she has taught physical science, chemistry, physics, biology, anatomy, and physiology. And she, if approved, she would be on step 34 of the master's lane in our salary schedule, and that would amount to this year $55,712. And then it is also recommended that she receive a $3,000 signing bonus to be paid over 2 years. And our second recommendation comes from the high school as well. Tammy McKenzie's recommending Christy Shanks for the high school counselor position at the high school. She holds a BS degree in psychology from Iowa State and a master's in school counseling from Wayne State. She has been a school counselor just for 1 year. As a K-12 in the past 3 has been a 6-12 counselor, so 4 years. And she brings a variety of experiences to the table. If approved, she would be on step 10 of the master's lane, and this would be in the amount of $40,594. And remember, so we have to give them the salaries for this year, and obviously we haven't settled with our teachers, so that'll change when we get settled. Next, we have at the middle school, Jerry Raymond's recommending Margaret Gruba as a special education teacher associate. She has a 4-year degree from University of Wisconsin River Falls. If approved, to be a 7-hour day and be paid $11.55 per hour plus 30 cents for her education. It's $11.25 plus the 30 cents for her education. Randy Beeson is recommending Kurt Christensen as the head girls track coach. Kurt has coached for the district for the last 20 years. If hired, he would be on step 11, receive a salary of $6,752.
Step 47 here?
What's that?
Step 47? He wasn't.
Step 4, yeah, he would be on step 47, yeah. Step
Quite a few-
11.
quite a few steps.
Yeah, it goes forever. We have one volunteer. Randy Beeson's recommending Sydney Kurgovich as a volunteer for the girls' track program. And then we have 2 new positions that we're requesting permission to advertise and try to fill. The first would be a position that I'm calling the Director of Teacher and Learning. It'd be comparable